Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke, and today is Saturday, the 22nd of March, 2025. And I'm waking up to a rather cloudy morning, I guess. We did have a really nice sunrise here. Yeah, so I'm here just waiting, actually, at the moment, just to see who pops in and who joins me this morning before I get too heavily into any particular topic. Last night was another weird dreaming night too, but I'm not going to get into the substance of those dreams. I am going to mention that I am doing my tarot workshop today at 11, and I have right now 1, 2, 3, 4 people. So if there's anybody else who was looking to join and just didn't get to, good morning, Alistair, or good afternoon, really, where you are, or no, maybe it is morning still because there's only a 4-hour time difference right now. So yes. Yeah, I've got that workshop going today at 11, and tomorrow I do have clients who are going to be here. I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm going to do a live stream tomorrow. I might, because I've got a number of things I have to catch up on, so I might decide not to do Sunday, but then come back on Monday. So we'll see how that plays out. And it's yeah, I have an interesting topic today, and some of it I think kind of comes off of what I was talking about yesterday to some degree, and what I was talking about with regard to we were talking a little bit about Christianity, and I think one of the topics that came up had to do with people dealing with the ideas that they have. I think somebody had been on here who had said, I have a hard time separating my own beliefs and thoughts from that which I feel like has been, imposed on us from the outside, society, family, church, whatever. So trying to figure out who you authentically are in the midst of all of that. There was definitely a question about that. And I also watched happen again, just not necessarily out looking for these. There's some channels, like I said, YouTube has this thing that once you watch one channel, it sort of pops in, and now that's you see that channel all the time, whether or not you always want to see that channel all the time. Although again, this was the Dan McClellan channel, and something had popped up about the Bible and slavery, and I watched that bit, and there's something that came out of that really kind of, I don't know. Now, I've been somebody who's religious studies. I studied religious studies as an undergraduate. I actually did grad work in religious studies. My doctorate, while technically in literary studies, is focused on afterlife beliefs, and does definitely focus on ancient religion, certainly, and early Christianity. So I do have all of this background. And I was raised Catholic, but of course I don't practice Catholicism at this point in my life. As anybody who knows me knows. Hello. So yeah, so the topic, so he was talking about the idea of redemption, okay? Because that's a big thing in Christianity. You talk about being redeemed. And yeah, so we've got okay, hopefully yeah, we've already got people on in the mornings. I think this is what I find on the weekends, is that more people end up coming in who are just, wasting my time. But and good morning, Kelsey. There's a moderator right there. So yes, yeah, it's a good morning, good to see you. And yeah, we're already starting with some interesting activity, but that's YouTube for you. In any case, what I was going to talk about, okay, so the idea of redemption, and also one of the big stumbling blocks that people tend to have to spiritual work, especially spiritual work outside their tradition, and that has a lot to do with fear of the devil, or the fear of Satan in particular. Now, I know that there are some people who watch this live stream who are coming, from Hinduism or from Buddhism or different places. So this is irrelevant in that sense to people who are coming from those traditions. But I thought this would be an interesting topic to sort of address, and I feel like this is something that's maybe a little bit more for the Cattonia live stream. certain aspects of it I do want to address, especially with respect to this idea and the feminine, which I think I talked a little bit about. Actually, I did talk a little bit about it on the last Catonia live stream. But we've got, so it's, yeah. So what we've got here is this, okay. So let's see where I want to begin here. First, I think I'm going to begin with the whole concept of Satan. Okay. And this is a question I actually ask my religion students as well. I'm like, tell me what the word Satan means. And the thing is, it's not something that's explicitly discussed in the book. So they have to, it's one of those questions like you had to have listened to the lecture to have gotten it. And not all of them get it right because, because they haven't paid attention. And so it's typically, or they're coming from a particular very conservative religious background that has a very kind of black and white view on what that term means. Now, the word Hasatan appears in the Old Testament, and Hasatan, which is the name for, which means Satan, basically. It's the Hebrew letters Shin, Teth, and Nun, and Shin, Teth, and Nun have to do with these are the letters that we make up of this name. And really, okay, you have to understand too that in that period of time that there was a divine council of the gods. The Old Testament, that is one of the things that you find that runs through the Bible. There is a council of gods, and we tend to think of the Bible as monotheistic. That's another Tim McClellan topic where he's like, yeah, not exactly. It doesn't necessarily espouse monotheism. Monotheism is a later development that is developed out of those texts or assumed out of those texts. But typically when you're talking about the God of Israel, Israel is the inheritance of this particular God. And that is actually what the Bible says of Yahweh or Adonai. And Yahweh is among the council. And I always point to Psalm 82 that mentions this, but there are many other places that talk about this as well. And now where do we mainly see? We see Hasatan in a couple of different places. We see it in Numbers, and then particularly in Job. This is the first place that people will see it, because the whole book of Job is about this guy who has all this wealth and land and family and all that cool abundance and stuff. And of course, he does all the right rituals and praises, Yehovah, Yahweh, Adonai, in the way that he should. And then the Hasatan says, oh, I see your servant Job over there. Notice he's called servant. Your servant Job over there. And Yahweh's kind of pointing him out and going, see, look, what a great guy he is. And he's like, oh, I bet I could make him turn against you. And he goes, oh, I'll bet you can't. So they kind of have this like little thing. And so finally, Yahweh says, yeah, okay, go ahead. Take everything away from him. You have my permission. Okay. So he does. He goes and he takes, and then mind you, he's not there to be a representation of ultimate evil. The Hasatan is there as a kind of prosecuting attorney, or is there to make this, or he's there to somehow act as an obstructor. The word diabolos in Greek has to do with one who puts an obstruction in your path. And to put an obstruction in somebody's path is not necessarily an evil. The example that I will always give to my students about that is I talk about, and it's weird that this topic is coming up again, but I had a friend who I'd worked with back in the early 2000s, and his brother was going to go for a job interview. He lost his job and was going to be interviewing in New York City. And he had this interview scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Had to get up, catch the train into the city. Alarm didn't go off, completely missed his train. And he was like, it's, when you're trying to get a job and you want to get something, it's really, it's annoying, right? So he went, everything that he did though, to try to correct for time or whatever, he was basically screwed. He didn't make his train. And it was like, oh, well, you've just missed an opportunity. You've just missed that job interview. It's terrible, right? All these obstructions were placed in his path. As it turns out, his brother was trying to interview on September 11th and was interviewing at the World Trade Center. And if he had gone, he might not still be here right now. So the point being is that sometimes when life throws obstructions in our path, there's a good reason for it. I mean, maybe it's a reason we don't know. We think, we have a plan and we're super annoyed that something is getting in the way of our plan. I know I get this way all the time, and I'm sure other people do too. You're like, oh, I'm trying to do this and I've got to do it in just this way, and this piece is out of order, and now everything's all screwed up. And we talk about this as trickster energy too. That's the energy of the trickster. It's that unexpected element that comes in. It's the fact that it's a beautiful sunny day and you don't bring your umbrella, and out of nowhere it starts to rain. It's all of these factors that that screw us up. We have everything perfectly timed to get to work, and then when you go to work, and then it's like all of a sudden there's an accident, there's construction. Oh no, now I got to sit here for 20 minutes. These are all the things that obstruct us, that get in our path, and we don't have control. And what they remind us is that we don't have control. Okay. But these obstructions are not always there to, we may find them to be a nuisance. We may see them as an evil, right? What bad juju do I have today that all this, things are not going my way? Maybe things aren't going your way because that's not the way you're supposed to go. Or in the midst of all these things happening, when we talk about breaking a narrative or breaking a habit pattern or a thought, I can sit here and talk at people all day. And that was something else I had thought of that I got off the live stream yesterday. I can talk at people all day. I can say all the fun academic stuff that I know, right? I can even talk about my life experience. But the bottom line is, if I talk to you about certain kinds of spiritual experiences, you can go, okay, yeah, that's really great, whatever. If they don't happen to you, if you don't experience something in your own way, they're just a bunch of words. You have to kind of have something to experience that. And the only way in which one is really able to experience this kind of, the only way you're going to have an experience that's going to take you out of what's normative for you is for something to come in and happen to you. Sometimes it's a trauma, sometimes it's a crisis, sometimes it's an unexpected thing that just throws off whatever your plan is or whatever it is that you were doing. And we tend to see this as bad luck. We tend to see this as I can't catch a break. This is the Saturn energy astrologically. This is that energy that says, whoa, breaks on here. Now, Saturn, of course, we also associate with tradition and authority a lot of times, but it's like, yeah, you need something that is going to, in order to change your perspective, this is why I always say that the rational conscious mind has very little to do with your with spiritual progress. It has very little to do with our understanding of the world. You think that's everything to your understanding of the world. It has only to do with the identity, with your ego, with the mask that we present to the world. That's all that your thoughts really have to do with, because your thoughts are always like, oh no, I'm this kind of a person and I believe this kind of a thing and these are my ideals. But we have a lot that comes in unconsciously that influences us, and we're just not aware of it because it's not part of our ego consciousness. It's unconscious. By definition, it's unconscious. And people say, well, I know what's in my unconscious. Do you? If you do, then by definition, it's no longer unconscious. It's now conscious because you know what it is. Okay, so when we talk about the Satan force is the one that makes you stop. And it's a test. We see it as a test, but the test isn't just, it often can come across as, haha, I'm just poking at you. But really, it's just pointing out that life really is not something that we have any control over in a lot of ways. We like to have this semblance of order, but there's a reality of disorder. And rather than viewing that disorder as an evil, it's kind of like, okay, that disorder has a place. People who practice chaos magic, this is kind of a thing that they do. Chaos magicians are, try to deliberately not follow patterns because the idea is that they're trying to break out of norms and patterns. Now, sometimes, like anything, people can go to extremes with anything. But the idea is that you are not, can live with unpredictability. That used to always kind of be my tagline: learning to live with and love the unpredictable. Learning to deal with unpredictability means you are dealing with the things that don't fall into your plan. Okay. So initially, when we talk about a figure like Satan, you are talking about a figure that often gets associated with trickster energy. Okay. It's that thing that comes in and causes disorder or causes obstructions. And that is literally what the terminology means. And Hasatan is actually considered to be an angel in the ancient council, or, you know, among the councils. And people have different figures that they identify, but really Hasatan, like a lot of these things, like Metatron and like some of these other things, they are a you know, like a lot of these things, they're titles. They're titles. They're not actual angels. Like, people will talk about Archangel Metatron, but Metatron's really a title. Hasatan is also a title. You have different angels that will act as the Hasatan. Okay, in the Bible. In Numbers, you have the story of Balaam and the donkey. He is basically a magician from some neighboring tribe who was sent to curse the Israelites, and you know, by this one king. And his donkey keeps seeing this angel with a flaming sword, and the donkey like freaks out and keeps stepping back. And of course, Balaam can't see, and he's just like, "What is wrong with you?" He keeps beating the donkey, and finally, the donkey is given a voice to say, "Why do you keep beating me?" Which is kind of funny. But then finally, he sees the angel. That angel is a Satan. It is a Satan. It is one that is there to stop you from going against the will of what the divine, you know, whatever that mysterious divine is that we don't know about, trying to stop you from doing something. Okay. Now, those who are in esoteric practice have another view of Satan or Satan, and that has to do with the idea of representing. Having to do, you have kind of this thing that's connected to the Cathars. You have this idea of something that represents what it means to be incarnate or in the flesh. And that comes from an idea that we get out of the philosophers that say spirit is greater than flesh. Okay. And this is, I think, a lot of where women get tied up in this, because women, of course, are seducers and so forth, you know, not that men can't be too, right? But it's just, there's always this idea of the woman as the seducer. Right, so she has this earthy energy. And the idea, the most extreme version of this thought, and people attribute it to the Cathars, and again, I have had friends who have done more scholarship into the Cathars who say, no, that's not really what they were about. That's just what people said they were about. But allegedly, the nature of the heresy was that they believed any kind of incarnation was evil. Okay, anything that had to do with being incarnate was evil. And so, therefore, if you gave birth to a child, that would be evil, because you're taking a spirit and putting it in flesh. Now, obviously, this is kind of a ridiculous idea, and that was what the church objected to, because they said, well, the commandment is to be fruitful and multiply, right? Church is against birth control and all that, but you're supposed to, and that therefore, and of course, but we do have St. Paul, who clearly doesn't want to have sex with anybody, and he just thinks it's all bad. And I guess if you have to, if you're married, like he definitely has this very negative attitude towards it. If you read his epistles, the ones that we assume are actually written by him, but that's another story. But in any case, yeah, there's definitely this kind of attitude about celibacy and things like that, and. Weirdly, Carl Jung actually kind of connects this to Kibali worship and the ones, the Gali, who actually castrate themselves as followers of her, because there's that phrase in Revelations about being eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven, right? And weirdly, this is actually the basis for celibacy in the priesthood, at least one of the bases for it. So yeah, in any case, it's an interesting thought here. But the esoteric idea of Satan has to do, generally Satan is considered to sit kind of at the middle of the tree of life. And weirdly, not at Da'at, which is the abyss, but rather more at Tiferet. Because that's when we see the image of Baphomet. Okay, Baphomet's very popular now in a lot of places. And Baphomet is not Satan. A lot of times people will use Baphomet as a representation of Satan, but not exactly. Baphomet represents all possibilities for incarnation. So he sits at the center, he's between spirit and matter, and he has the upside down pentagram, because the upside down pentagram points down towards the earth. It points towards matter. The upright pentagram is the five-pointed star, and we tend to see it as representing like the four elements of earth plus spirit, like pointing up towards spirit. Like we're thinking in that up and down model, which again, that is also something. When you think that salvation is up, then you devalue what's down, which of course is the earth under your feet. But anyway, that is part of what I talk about in my book. But the idea is, yeah, that anything that's made, when to come into flesh is to come into a world of sin. Okay, and sin, as my grad school instructor used to point out, she said, sin is not a sin is not an original idea. It's not an idea that you see before Christianity. And the Greek word for sin, which I'm not remembering right now, but it's the Greek word that they tend to use, has to do with missing the mark. The idea that you've missed the mark. So somehow you're imperfect. You've missed the mark. And this is kind of an unconscious perception, I think, that we have, particularly in Western culture, that says to us that, if we're not perfect, that we have to aim for perfection. And that's a whole separate problem in this culture, this aiming for perfection. When you are, in fact, a human being who is going to do some things right, and you're going to do some things not right, because the whole process of learning something means you're going to do some shit wrong. Okay? You're not going to do something on the first try and just kill it. You know what I mean? You're not going to do that on the first try. You always have to learn. We are always going to make mistakes. Some of the theories of karma, and again, these theories of karma, truthfully, I'm not sure if they're originally Vedantic or not. Certainly they have evolved with 20th century occultism, like with Blavatsky bringing ideas from India and so forth to the West and to these Western occult circles. You have this idea of karma as this payment of debt. Now we do hear it. Like I said, my guru has made comments like that. Yeah, that this kind of like your actions make debts and credits. But I don't think it's thought of in terms of sin. Karma is not necessarily about sin. It's just about you have an action. That action has a consequence. The consequence is not a punishment. The consequence is just, oh, okay, you did X, Y happened. And then as we do certain things, we go, oh, maybe I should not do that thing. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. But when we get caught up in ideas of sin, when people get on a spiritual path, because you have this idea of, you have this fear of the devil. Okay. Now, if we go back to biblical ideas, the main place where we start to see the devil take on this kind of diabolical, demonic role is really in the New Testament. And there's occasional mentions of Jesus driving out demons and things like that. But you also have to remember, okay, the history of Jesus and who Jesus is that's another very long and complicated scholarly subject. But a lot of people think that he came out of a group called the Essenes. Okay, now the Essenes were a group of Jews who actually were very observant. They were more like Pharisees. They were very, very observant. There was sort of the very observant Jews, which we kind of associate with Pharisees and Sadducees, and then you have the ones who are more like the Hellenistic Jews, who were kind of like, yeah, we follow the tradition, but we're also part of this other world. They're more secular, I guess would be the word. Stoicism works for me. Well, yeah, that's there's a lot of people who like Stoicism. My personal opinion on Stoicism is a lot of it. Again, it's a philosophy, and it's way too. It doesn't take into account a lot of that unconscious material, which is why I think it has its limitations. But that's just my opinion. So you have this idea of. So people have this kind of unconscious. People have been raised in a particular religion. Now, again, it does not matter when somebody grows up whether they still believe in that religion or not. You could have somebody say, "Oh, screw it, I'm not Christian anymore. I don't practice this. I'm an atheist now," or whatever people will say. That's a pretty common thing that happens. People get disillusioned. They say, I don't care about any of that. The problem is, though, the ideas are still embedded in your unconscious. And even if you did not practice that religion, when you have something, if you are somebody, say, with a very rationalistic way of approaching things, and if things start to happen in your world that don't fit into that picture, into that structure, into that idea, especially if they're anything that we would maybe might define as numinous, Okay. Numinous, meaning that numen has to do with, really, I think that has a lot to do with ancient Roman religion, where we get that, where the word numen has to do with, oh gosh, what's the actual meaning of it? There's a specific meaning of it, but it has to do with that which we use it. Rudolf Otto tended to use this word, and numen and numinous has to do with the what we experience that we feel and perceive is other, and that we might even perceive of as sacred, but it's something that can terrify us. Okay. Took out. Okay, well, if you're gonna bring up that, then go away, because I don't want any right-wing stuff on here. And so yeah, so in any case, we have what you call it? So we have this idea of Jesus. We have this idea of we're talking about the devil here now, and and this idea of this fear of the devil. And that's what a lot of people will go with. They may think the whole idea is absolutely ridiculous, right? They'll think the idea is ridiculous. And then when they, but then when it comes down to it, when people start getting involved in other things, if anything happens, this was something that's happened recently, and I've had a couple conversations about this. Probably the most prominent examples we might see of this in the culture are people like Doreen Virtue and Anne Rice, at least at a certain point in time, where both of them, like Anne Rice, wrote about vampires and stuff, right? She always wrote about this kind of a thing. And then you had Doreen Virtue, who, to be honest, I've never been crazy about her or her work. She's just not, to me, it was always kind of too fluffy for me anyway. But she would have she had her angel cards and her ascended master cards, and she had all these, goddess things. She had all this stuff. And then all of a sudden she said, burn all of my stuff, throw it away. I've been saved. And I've run into that. And the word saved, that's actually going to be a good segue into the next thing I'm going to talk about. But she had this kind of thing about, now, because something happened to make her something that was numinous, something that really shook her to her core and made her decide that she had to run to something that she felt was safe. And what we feel is safe is what's traditional, what's familiar, because sometimes we have experiences and don't really understand what's happened, especially if we have approached all of these other forces from a monotheistic way of thinking. I know we've talked about templating and so forth, the way in which people will put a Christian template over things that maybe that are pagan or over other things, and their understanding of what happens is from that context. So if certain things happen and they're thinking it's, oh, this is good or this is evil, oh, that happened, that must mean, bad things are happening to me. No, sometimes when bad things are happening to you, so-called, subjectively bad, maybe it's like trying to show you places where you've been very comfortable and you need to think differently. Okay. It's not necessarily the case. Now, now certain other kinds of things notwithstanding, we're not going to get into people who perhaps try to work in certain spiritual realms or attract certain things out of fear or out of other stuff. That's kind of a whole separate subject. But typically speaking, when you're talking about that kind of a force, you're not. Satan actually is also a term that is used as a term of rebellion. It's a rebellion against a structure. It's a rebellion against tradition. And so what you think of as more formalized or codified Satanism, Lede Satanism, Temple of Set, Satanic Temple doesn't really count because they're more of a political activist. Most of them are not even, they don't believe any of it. They're just they're atheists, really, who are just basically using Satanism as a kind of litmus test to the freedom of religion in the US. And I think actually they do a great job, because they will go places, and when they try to institute there's going to be Bible study in public school, there's going to be this, they're going to be that, they're like, that's great, we actually want satanic things now in the public school. And people are like, well, no, we don't want that. And basically it brings it to court, and then the court has to go, oh, okay, yeah, this is all religious, none of this can be in here, right? They're testing the church state thing, and they do a lot of that to try to protect people's First Amendment rights with regard to that. So that's what they exist for. So they're not Satanists in in that kind of a sense. They're Satanists in the rebellion sense, in the sense more in the sense of preserving order, really, weirdly enough. But when we think about other people, there a lot of it is like LaVey Satanism is, well, LaVey also was a circus guy, and so there's a lot of showmanship in his version of things. I have read, I've read the Satanic Bible and I've read different things, and honestly, there's nothing that terrible about it. It's just really just trying to reverse everything. It's like, oh, if they tell you to be meek, then you be strong, and it's just that kind of stuff. So it's not something, I mean, to be honest, it's not something I take a whole lot very seriously. But at that said, if I knew somebody who was a LaVey Satanist, I don't think they'd make a bad neighbor, because generally their whole codus is, I live my life, don't bother me, and I don't bother you. Okay, sounds good to me, better than somebody meddling in my stuff. So it's not anything that appeals to me, but to me, it's literally just, it's coming out of the same tradition. It's just a response to it. Oh yeah, you say I do this, well, I'm going to do the opposite. That's kind of the way it is. Oh, I have to focus on giving myself up. No, I'm going to focus just on myself. And they do things in a very kind of, meant to do things in a very kind of hedonistic way. But again, it's really for the purpose of rebellion. I mean, that's the whole structure of it. It's about a rebellion. This is why we associate the idea of Lucifer, the light bringer, with a rebellion, and that's really something that comes out of Milton. That's not something that's really in the Bible per se. But, other than they talk about the fall of the morning star, but that's actually a reference to a Babylonian king and not a reference to Satan. So, but this does bring me to the other thing, and I know we're getting to 8 o'clock, so I want to do my reading soon. The whole idea of redemption, because what Dan McClellan said on his thing yesterday, which really just blew my mind, was he talked. And the thing is, I should know this. I mean, I've studied Greek, I've studied Latin. My Greek is pretty lousy. My Latin is better. But he mentions the idea of the word redemption, and we always think of redemption. We equate it with the Greek soteria, like being saved, right? And we are being saved, but saved from what? Crowley is the Beast was another example of this rebellion. Yes, exactly, Alistair. And it's interesting, but that you bring Crowley up too, because a lot of people see him as this great Satanist, but it's kind of like yes and no. He, as a black magician or as somebody, he actually went to court over that. He is just like, he considered calling him a black magician and a Satanist a slander. He's like, but the court said, well, you do call yourself the Great Beast 666, but Crowley is definitely in rebellion, and he has a whole different interpretation of the beast in Babylon and Revelation and so forth. A rather interesting one that does it has merit, I think. That is, but again, it's completely unrelated to Satanism as people tend to think about it. It's not, the OTO is not a satanic organization. And I don't think of Crowley as a Satanist. I mean, he does work with that kind of stuff, but he's working with it as a force that exists, as something that is part of it. And probably, if we think about the way egregores work or watchers, if you believe in something long enough, it does develop a kind of existence. You know what I mean? I remember David Rankin saying, when there was a conference in Glastonbury, and he was talking about working with angels. And we had a whole lot of, witches in the audience going, oh, well, I'm a witch, I don't work with angels. And he said, yeah, okay, he says, but you have to realize there hasn't been any collective worship of ancient pagan gods for a very long time. But there has been a collective belief in angels for like 2,000 years. So you're probably more likely to, there's going to be more energy in that kind of work than you might get in some of the other kind of work. Not saying that people couldn't, worship those deities or whatever, but he's kind of pointing out that when you have collective energy behind something and belief in our minds and in our consciousness, that actually does make a difference. So Crowley with all of that as well. And Crowley is a perfect example of a misunderstood figure when it comes to a lot of that. Because I remember all the people warning me off against Crowley when I was interested in his work. And then I thought, Jim Fraser, actually, who was my boss, who was actually, I found out before he died, he was a Plymouth Brethren. I had no friggin' idea. He's like, oh, I knew Crowley's family. I'm like, yeah, well, they didn't really know Crowley. I know how it is when your family doesn't know about you. They didn't know Crowley. But I sat down because he told me, don't read anything by that man. He's evil. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go home and start reading him right away because, you know, I have a contrary nature that way. And as I read Crowley, I'm like, nah, Crowley's not evil. Crowley's dramatic. And there's a lot of what he says that people take at face value, and you can almost never take Crowley at face value. But I always tell people who really want to know Crowley, I said, go start with the Scrutinies of Simon If. Go read some of his detective stories. You'll get a sense of how his mind works. And I think, because I think those stories are fun. I still have a copy of that book. But anyway, so yeah, so when we're talking about this, you have to remember that you are talking about a force that is rebelling against tradition. And typically what they do is they threaten people. They say, well, there's heaven and there's hell. And therefore, if you don't follow the rules, you're going to go to hell and you're going to be punished. And that's what people kind of go, ha ha. But then people like secretly are going, oh, well, I don't really know. What if that really happens? And that seems to be kind of the core of where people decide that they need to retreat to tradition, especially if anything happens that kind of disturbs their psyche in some way, because they feel that that is the safe and tested kind of a path. But that gets back to the idea of the word redemption. That's where I was going. Redemption is actually not a word that has to do with saving, except in the sense of when you redeem a coupon, right? Think about that. When you redeem a coupon, that's the word that you use. This coupon can be redeemed for. And if you read on them, because I know people don't really use them that much anymore, but you used to go in the newspaper and cut the coupons out and everything. Can be redeemed for, and it gives some kind of a figure, how many cents on a dollar or whatever, that the store could redeem from the manufacturer. So what does redeem mean? It means you can buy it back. It means you paid for this, but we'll give you this much money back. Okay? Redeem means to buy back. And remember, this came up in the discussion of slavery. And as Dan pointed out, he had said, it's actually, the idea is that you are a slave to sin, or you are a slave to your neighbor's gods, or you're a slave to something else. And it's like a ransom. Or it's a price. I'm going to buy you back from this other force, whatever it is. In theory, if you're talking about sin, you're buying somebody back from the devil, right? But you're being purchased. And that's what he said. You're being purchased. Even the idea of Jesus on the cross, it's the idea that you're being purchased. There's a price that comes. It was a ransom paid for you to save you from the devil. But it's not to set you free. It's basically to make you a slave to something else. When you purchase somebody, it doesn't say, there's nothing, this is what his point is. He says the Bible does not, later on when abolitionism became a thing and people realized how wrong slavery was, then it was like they kind of had to try to retrofit it into the Bible. But the Bible does not condemn slavery. And in fact, the relationship of redemption is one of enslavement or being a servant, as I said. You are in service to this particular deity. And so it is not, I mean, people can take that as they want. Some people, but basically you're trading your enslavement from one thing to another in theory. But that comes out of a worldview, to get back to the Essenes, that is, the Essenes did have this good evil view. There's a lot of apocalyptic Essene literature that is about a cosmic battle between good and evil. And that's not really part of traditional Judaism, okay? It's an idea that's kind of developed that probably comes out of the mystical Zoroastrian thinking. You know, the three magi? Yeah, those guys. They're astrologers, but they're also these thinkers in the Magoi are these thinkers who deal with, the Zoroastrians definitely have this idea that there's a good God and there's an evil God, and that there's this cosmic battle going on, and that you have to choose the side that you're going to take. And this is not something that's original to any of the religions that we now think of as monotheism, but it became kind of incorporated via the Essenes. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I've never thought about it that way, is what Kelsey's saying. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's, it's definitely, it's the idea that you're being purchased. And the reason that I would say it is a kind of enslavement is because there's certain rules you must follow, or else. You had better follow the rules, or I'm going to condemn you to the eternal fire or whatever. And is Suda on? I didn't even see Suda. Good morning. I didn't see her in the feed. So So I'm glad that she's joined us, and I know I'll be seeing her later today too. Yeah, it's so this idea of redemption, it's just kind of like you're trading one kind of slavery for another. And I think this is why, typically, if you feel, in order to rebel against something, you have to feel confined in some way. In some way, you have to feel confined. Now, again, don't want to just pick on Christianity here, because there's a lot of situations that socially and traditionally where we can feel confined. Okay. But that is definitely something that was biblical. And I thought, wow, I had never thought about redemption as that. Mormonism had so many rules. Yeah, and Mormonism, you also got the Book of Mormon, and there's a whole other layer there too. And also there was a lot of proselytization with Mormonism too. Like, I remember them coming and knocking on the door, I mean, it was just, there's, Jehovah's Witnesses kind of do that too. Although I don't think that they're quite, I don't know. I'm not quite sure where they are with connection to Mormonism, but yeah, because then you have a whole other layer of stories and rules and things in Mormonism, right? And so people will rebel against something that they consider to be a tradition. So from that perspective, right? And so you get threatened with fear of hellfire and things like that, because it's kind of like, no, you had better stay in your lane and stay in line. But if you are an actual spiritual seeker, literally life, I was working on my class notes today, and I was like, literally life is about change. If you have the same views and never change your entire life, then you have not grown. So in order to grow, you have to challenge your own belief system. And I've often said to people who are very religious and are cling to their beliefs very tightly, I say, look, if your religion is that strong, your asking questions should not dismantle your belief. You should be able to question your religion and come out in the end with the same answer, in theory. Okay. Sometimes people don't. And that gets back to belief is what we insist the truth is. Faith is we believe the truth no matter what it turns out to be. And the truth for everybody is going to be different. So, yeah, so I don't know. So this is my thought on the fear of Satan. And believe me, I understand it. I grew up as and a lot of people who get involved in mystical Catholicism, they start to, like, if you read the writings of the saints, they're like, oh, I'm so unworthy, and I'm so this. And it's like, you got to get past all that I am not worthy business, because it suggests that you are a peon and God is great and can smush you, which is also from the Book of Job. And a lot of Tantra is rebellion against Brahmanical rules of purity. Yes, exactly, right. And Tantra has the same reputation in Hinduism, you're right. Has the same reputation. Oh, they're all black magicians and they're this and that. And it's like, I mean, there is the Vargamata strain of Tantra that does tend to do that. But that's also a lot about socioeconomic class too. People who practice that kind of Tantra tend to be from lower castes or lower economic brackets. And like you have a worship of Pambagira and things that happen in like Kimbanda and different these kinds of, it's a litmus test, right? Yeah, kind of, yeah. It's a test of, yeah, I mean, there's the idea of the rules, and the rules have to do with maintaining the social structure. When the social structure needs to change, those rules are going to be challenged. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of that challenge going on. And whatever ends up being the prevailing belief system of a society, or even what you might think of as the right belief system for a society, and I don't know that you can really dogmatically assert that, although that's the thing about monotheism. Monotheism says one God, one truth. Well, that's problematic. It's always problematic. And you ask anybody who works in religious interfaith stuff, that's problematic. Because then it's like, if there's three monotheisms, who's got it right? It's kind of a ridiculous question, because you're talking about something that's really beyond thought, beyond comprehension, and your interaction with that is going to be different. There's an aspect of it that connects you to a social group and community, and then there's an aspect of it that has to do with you and your own individual path. Okay, so the question is, where does it intersect with your own individual path, and how much of the social are you willing to negotiate there? But if you really feel confined by that system, I mean, the fear that, oh, I'm going to step outside of line and something horrible is going to happen to me, probably not. It's kind of the fear that we're often told. So we're almost out of time. So let's just quickly do a reading. Yeah, we're starting with the inner voice, High Priestess card. Okay. What is the inner voice telling us? And this is kind of where I was going at before. Not everything comes through the rat, but I can talk at you for ages. I can tell you all this stuff. It has to be what's experienced and felt. Best that I can usually do as a coach is kind of help you interpret what your signs are. Ultimately, you have to decide what they mean for you. But your inner voice, maybe we're kind of in this space because we're in this space of change, okay? This is the inner feeling of which we're unaware. The change card is the Wheel of Fortune. That's change. It's exactly that kind of change, that unpredictable change that we don't have any control over. It happens to us, we respond to it. And it's saying our inner voice is trying to move us in the direction of responding to that. And the external feeling of which we are aware is the no-thingness card. Now, this is interesting because this is the Hierophant. The Hierophant does represent tradition, okay? But the Hierophant in this deck also represents no-thingness. I think one of the fears of getting away from tradition is that you're stepping into a space. It's like, okay, but if it's not what I was told, then what is it? And what if I get it wrong, right? So no-thingness says learning to be in the gap. And again, between being in the gap and dealing with change, you've got the inner voice. Got the inner voice saying, what's the inner voice? What is the real inner me trying to prompt me towards? Our advice card is the Ace of Wands. And this is really funny because we just entered Aries season and we're right at the beginning, and the aces are right at the beginning of fire, right? Okay, the source. Connect in with source. How do we connect with source? Different things for different people. Meditation is one very good way. In other words, you got to shut your mind up enough to be able to hear what your inner voice is saying. And your inner voice is always that connection to source, whatever that means for you, whether source is our, the universe, the cosmos. The reality of what things are is so beyond our 3D world that sometimes the reason we have images is because the mind needs something to connect to. And it's fine to have something. We were talking about bhakti the other day, the idea of having an image to connect to. That's fine. But we don't want to mistake the image for all that there is. Okay? But source is where the inspiration comes from. And the outcome card is the Three of Cups. And what's the Three of Cups? This is celebration. You got these three kind of Maenadic kind of ladies dancing in the rain. And and celebration is about being social. It's about being out there. It's about celebrating. It's about being happy. It's about celebrating life, celebrating people, celebrating really how wonderful it is to be human. Instead of constantly shaming ourselves about what terrible people we are as humans and how afraid we have to be. And I think this is the flippant worldview that's being promoted here, is that stop walking around living in fear that you're doing it wrong and that you're a terrible person and that you have to be ashamed. This is saying, no, celebrate who you are. And you know what? If people don't like certain things about you, well, that's their problem. Obviously none of us wants to willfully go out and hurt another person. How funny, you got this yesterday, the Three of Cups. Yeah, telling you to celebrate, and celebrating with your friends too. Celebrate with the people who appreciate you and who enjoy being with you. And I think that's part of it too. We spend our energy, because we've talked a lot about, we've been seeing a lot of 11th house stuff around. Don't let toxic energy dim your light and who you are. Okay, don't let that toxicity dim your light. It's okay to have this, basically we're creating these scary figures of, what happened. Ooh, this is some monster of rebellion. It's only a monster if you're trying to cling on to power in some way. And the only person really in theory who should have power over you is you, which by the way is one of the lessons of esoteric orders. But anyway, last card, reassuring. This is from the Essential Oil deck. The key word is peaceful. The trigger statement is, my life is a mess. It's talking about chaos, right? True statement, I find stillness within. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner world. Go within, inner voice, to find peace there, and your life will reflect that. Something Joanne says a lot too, when she's on here about, your inner world should reflect, your outer world should reflect your inner world in some way, because there's really fundamentally no difference between the two. So how you see something, whether you see something, if you see something as terrible, bad, no good, evil, horrible, then that says something about how you feel about yourself inside. So that's why it's saying no. Look for these other things. Look for what's happening. Look for that, because when you find it out there, you find it in here too. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. We're a little bit past time. I'll see some of you later for the tarot workshop. And again, anybody who didn't sign up who wants to can, text me or message me, because most of the people who do have my number or have some contact with me. And hopefully we will meet later today. And anybody joining me, by the way, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, my sister will be joining us for today's tarot workshop. So people who are on today will get to meet her as well. Have a great Saturday. And like I said, I'm not going to probably come on tomorrow, but I will be back on Monday. Thanks. Oh, you're welcome, Alistair. And so